Hey everybody, this is part one of our Frasier reboot content. For those of you who don't know, please check out this video here, which goes into detail explaining how we got in this kooky situation of applying to be writers on the Paramount Plus reboot for Frasier. Spoiler alert, we were ghosted, but it's okay. We decided we were going to make lemonade out of the situation and share our experience and our story with the world, whether or not they hired us or not. So what you're about to see is a mock-up version of the first script we officially sent to Paramount Plus and the return of Frasier. We really hope you enjoy it. Thanks. Okay, so here we go. So this episode was essentially designed to be the return of Frasier, right? That's the perspective that we came from when we wrote this. So after the original series on Frasier, he moved to Chicago, and that was kind of where it dropped off. We did actually write almost an entire season worth of material where we were going to kind of dig a little deeper into the explanations regarding that storyline, but not so much this episode. This episode, we really wanted to commiserate the loss of Frasier's father. We wanted to pay our condolences to John Mahoney, and we wanted to just give a really honest and heartfelt return to Frasier, the character. So where we begin in this storyline is Frasier is returning to Seattle, reacting to the news that he has just lost his father. So here we have Frasier. He is approaching Ronnie's door. For those of you who don't remember Ronnie, she was Marty's wife at the end of the series of Frasier. So we now have Frasier here at her doorstep. He's carrying his luggage. He's in the hallway. He's soaking wet. And, you can't really see his face, but it's him. We wanted to have that kind of shot where he's walking up to the door. He's looking very dapper. He knocks on the door, and Ronnie answers with this really sweet, endearing smile, like, "Oh, Frasier." And then that's when we cut to Frasier in the doorway, and he's just looking money, and he knows it, and he has this great moment where it's his return, and he just says,
"Hello."
And then we, give him the applause, right? So Frasier and Ronnie have this, nice, pleasant chit chat as she takes his coat, he dries off, and he enters in Martin and Ronnie's apartment. She steps away for a moment, and Frasier looks out the window. He sees the Seattle skyline, and then he kind of takes a moment for himself, saying a line.
"Hello again, my old friend."
Yeah, so he has this nice tender moment to himself, just kind of reminiscing about Seattle. We really wanted to emphasize the return to Seattle because I certainly believe, just as a fan, that Seattle was definitely a central focus around the show. Frasier was originally set in Seattle, so I felt it was only appropriate to incorporate that and to bring him back to Seattle. If you put Frasier somewhere else, it's not Frasier, right? Like when Frasier was in Boston, that wasn't Frasier, that was Cheers. When Frasier was in Nantucket, that wasn't Frasier, that was Wings. So, I personally think that a city is really what helps define a show. And I personally believe that a lot of the best episodes were when they were on location in that city. So when we were writing this, we really didn't want to take Frasier out of Seattle because, again, I felt like it wouldn't be Frasier anymore. it would be something else.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like Sex and the City. It's like, Sex and the City didn't work when Carrie went to Paris. She had to come back to New York for it to be Sex and the City again.
Exactly.
So I felt like if we put Frasier in a different city, like Chicago or wherever, again, it wouldn't be Frasier. So I felt the return of him coming back to Seattle was a very important element in the show. And this was the way to incorporate that return to Seattle was through the loss of his father.
Even though we all discovered Frasier through Cheers, which is set in Boston, on the show Frasier, we all discovered Frasier in Seattle. So it's like, even though he was first introduced through Cheers, it's like we focused on Frasier in Seattle because that's where he discovered his life. And it's like, Cheers, he was a side note, but in Frasier, Cheers is a side note. And even though we're honoring, a legacy that was Frasier's a spinoff of Cheers, that still it was a matter of defining this character, like this is where he's from, this is where his outlook is, and overall ideology is based out of, and having a loss of someone who introduced him to the world through Seattle through his father, who was played perfectly by John Mahoney, God rest his soul. Like that was a very important element of the reboot of Frasier in our vision.
So that's where we are. I mean, you don't take Batman out of Gotham, right? So
right.
So that's where we are right now. Is Frasier has a moment where he looks out at that Seattle skyline and he is just feeling that nostalgia towards the city he came from. Ronnie then takes Frasier's coat. They continue chit-chatting. Frasier kind of looks around and he notices that Ronnie's place is, kind of in disarray. And, she just kind of steamrolls him, going off how she's just been so busy. She's been getting things ready for Martin's funeral. And, she's just chit-chatting. And then Frasier kind of stops and he's like, hey, like, how are you doing? Right? He kind of notices. So he stops and asks her how she's doing. And then she kind of gets tearful and she explains, that things have just been hard. She explains what happens with her and Marty. And, Ronnie's a tough girl. So she kind of snaps out of it really quickly and pulls herself together. She dries her tears and she tells Frasier, like, hey, we better, get ourselves together before Niles and the gang shows up.
The last thing I want to do right now is go anywhere with Daphne, Niles, and their gaggle of offspring. I came up here in such a rush that I didn't even have time to find a proper hotel room.
So now Frasier's all like bleh, annoyed because the last thing he wants to do is hang out with Niles and his family. He didn't even get a hotel room set up. That's when he's like, ugh, I don't want to do this. Ronnie steps in and is like, hey, it's okay. Why don't you just stay here? And then Frasier has this great moment where he looks around and says this line.
Oh, Ronnie, I think the last thing you'd want is for me to be hanging around here, cluttering up the place.
She's like, whatever, man, it's okay. I'm, going to Florida with my sister, so you'll have this place all to yourself. Frasier's like, you know what? I think I'm going to take you up on this offer. I could really use just some peace and quiet. Well, that ain't gonna be tonight. So the door opens and then Jody and Johnny come busting through the door. Grandma! I don't think I will ever get used to that. As they're hugging in the doorway, we're just going to stop here and we are going to introduce the Niles family. For all of these characters, these are not necessarily the actors that we envision playing the role so much as they had physical characteristics that we thought matched the character. So this is kind of what we envisioned them to look like, not necessarily be played by. So here is Niles and his family, and we're just going to kind of unpack and introduce these characters. So we have the oldest son, David. David is, he is just the quintessential Crane the brain, right? Like, he is super smart, he is super genius, but he's super into electronics and engineering. And this is definitely the kid who like would blow out the power source growing up because he was trying to make some weird science project like in his bedroom.
Exactly.
Like, this kid is definitely gonna grow up to be like a millionaire CEO for sure. Or invent some kind of like amazing technological advancement, right? So next we have Lynn. She is David's younger sister. She's the second oldest. And Lynn is essentially your like quintessential troubled youth, right? She's very, very smart. She's super into, like classical art and music. Like, this is definitely a girl who like reads Kurt Vonnegut and spends her time quoting Maya Angelou. She listens to, Wagner, and she just is angry and troubled, and just like every 17-year-old girl, she's just trying to find her place in the world, right?
Right.
I personally think she is the epitome of Daphne's daughter. She is definitely going to have Daphne's like fiery energy. She has the Crane sophistication and education and all the angst of a modern day teenager. So,
a perfect combination.
Yeah. So next down the line, we have Jody. So Jody is just like your stereotypical 11-year-old, like TikTok kind of girl. She is definitely the type of girl who like shops at Claire's. She has like a unicorn backpack. This is the girl who would like have light up shoes 100%. It's like she definitely has that like JoJo kind of TikTok vibes, and she's very loud, she's very colorful, she's very energetic, but she's also a Crane. So she's very smart, she's very witty and like wise beyond her years. She's definitely the fun breath of fresh air. And then we have the baby, which is Johnny, which we actually named after John Mahoney. We thought that was a nice little nod.
A tasteful nod.
A tasteful nod to Martin. So Johnny is just like your average little Dennis the Menace kind of kid. Like, he's just the cute kid who has all the cute lines, He's the baby, gotta love him.
So with Johnny, we deliberately named him Johnny after John Mahoney as a way to have his simplistic outlook balance out the complexities of all of the genius that's happening around him with the adults, with his older sisters, his older brother. Like, Johnny's the one centerpiece of all the ensemble who keeps everything on an even keel, and with his simplicity, with his presence, in his dialogue, in his overall character. The all-American kid, the everyday kid.
Exactly. So just cute little blonde-haired rascal. Now that we know Niles' family, we're going to go back to the storyline. So Frasier, says hello. He's, doing the big uncle thing. He sees Jody. He delivers this really cute line. So she's like, Uncle Frasier, what'd you bring me from San Francisco?
Sorry, I'm all out of rice-a-roni. Here, have a wet nap from the plane.
Frasier attempts to say hello to Lynn, who is just not responsive. Daphne then kind of gets on Lynn for being rude to Frasier. Frasier's kind of observing the situation. He kind of steps in to diffuse the situation, like, hey, what's going on here? It's fine. Lynn? What? Say hello. Hi!
Hello.
So Daphne and Lynn go off fighting. Frasier looks like just completely shook, and he's trying to process like what he's just witnessed with this like hailstorm between Daphne and Lynn. And then through kind of the chaos, Frasier and Niles kind of see one another. And then they have this really tender moment where they see each other. They have this really tender moment where they hug each other. They have this great moment where it's like, oh, I haven't seen my brother in so long. They hug. It's a really tender moment until it's ruined by Daphne and Lynn, who come by squawking. And Frasier has this great traditional like Frasier moment where he makes a face and his like eyes pop out, reacting to them coming by. So, Niles tries to interject, tries to diffuse the fight. He's just completely ignored and defeated. So he's like, okay. Frasier has concern, like, Niles, like, is everything okay? And then Niles has this funny bit where he's like, it's fine. And then his eye starts like noticeably twitching, like from stress. And Frasier sees that his eye is twitching and responds,
Niles, good God, is your eye twitching?
is it? Frasier just looks at him like horrified. Niles then kind of holds up his hand. He covers his eyelid. He like holds it down. He takes a deep breath and he's like, it's fine. It's fine. So Niles tries to avert attention away from his eye twitch. And he says, hey, we better leave if we're going to make these reservations. So everybody gets ready to go when Ronnie announces that somebody has to take out Eddie. So we really did bring everybody back.
Do you mean to tell me that after all this time, Eddie is still alive?
Johnny jumps out and he's like, I'll do it. And he goes to open the door to like get the dog. Eddie runs over and looks at Frasier eye level, staring at him. And they have this funny moment where Frasier says the line,
My God, what have they been feeding you?
So we actually thought this was going to be a really funny joke because legit the dog would be like over 100 years old at this point. And just, so we thought it would be really funny for Eddie to still be there. And he just jumps up as young and sprightly as he ever was. I just thought it was like a really hilarious moment and a really good nod to the original show. Okay, so now we officially are at the restaurant. The family is now seated. The waiter has just brought their food. They thank him, and Niles starts talking to Frasier just about how surreal it is to have Frasier back. So Frasier, starts going on about his past and then starts boasting about his accomplishments very loudly to the table.
I've just been so busy these past years with my life in San Francisco. My private practice has been absolutely booming. Between that, writing 5 books in 3 years, and recently being added to the New York Times bestsellers list, I've barely had time for anything else.
Ah, yes. I rather enjoyed your refreshing insights on the subconscious dynamics between humanistic and behavioral perspectives amidst cross-cultural implications within a contemporary society. Yes. Thought-provoking. Frasier then shifts the focus to David and mentions about how he read about his recent accomplishments. Daphne mentions how she's so proud and how her and Niles share the news that David has just been accepted into a really prestigious program at Hackett Industries.
Hackett Industries?
So here we wanted to do kind of like a crossover into the Frasier Wings universe. Because for those of you who don't know, Frasier and Wings were created by the same people. And also, for those of you who don't know, we're both huge Wings fans as well.
Yes. Yes, we are.
So, Steven Weber is a badass. Okay, so, no, I'm serious. For those of you who haven't seen the Shining miniseries, whew.
They're both badasses.
Yeah,
They're actually really cool dudes.
Yeah, Steven Weber, man. That guy.
I mean, I don't know them personally, but from what I've read about them, and
yeah, well,
I like what I've read, so.
Steven Weber goes horde. Okay, anyways.
They both do.
So there was actually an episode on Wings where Frasier Crane came to Nantucket and he flew on Sandpiper Air. So we thought this would be a great little Easter egg for the fans of that show. And we also thought it would be a great nod to the Frasier Cheers Wings universe. And
exactly.
And we actually wrote in a lot of material that, you know, if we have been picked up to officially work on the show, we would have definitely incorporated a storyline to have the Hackett brothers come back in to the Frasier reboot as actors. So there you go. We kind of just wanted to pepper that in.
The third act of the Cheers legacy, we figured why not incorporate the Wings characters as well, and do it in a clever manner that's not too contrived or is too, as people say, overreaching. It's a matter of succinctly and just nicely tying that legacy up from Cheers to Frasier to Wings. It's just a nice way to, incorporate these elements that were, yes, created by the same people who created Frasier.
Yeah, but we really did think this through, and we really did find a way to kind of nicely tie all of these storylines and all of these different elements together. And our mindset is like, hey, that's what was really special about the show in the first place. There's no reason not to do it again. And all of these actors are still alive and kicking. So
exactly.
There's no reason not to bring them back and, just build upon that quilt, right? And just make it bigger. So David then goes on to explain all about Hackett Industries.
Yes, they're one of the leading mechatronics manufacturers here in Seattle. I'll be doing a summer internship in microelectromechanical system engineering. I'll be assisting in the testing of microelectronic sensors, monitoring system controllers, and I may even get to build my own self-regulating processor. Well, I'm just glad you're on our side.
All right, so Lynn scoffs, and then Frasier tries to involve Lynn in the conversation. But Niles kind of criticizes her, and then she just kind of shuts down a little bit as a reaction. These are definitely micro expressions and experiences, but Frasier is able to pick up on it right when Steven approaches. So Steven is the waiter, and he is just very much like your everyday kind of churn and burn waiter. He's like, are you done? Okay, great, here we go. Like, he's very nice, he's very direct, but it's like a very fake customer service kind of nice. So Steven approaches, and Frasier is kind of picking up on Steven's vibe too, like, a little pushy. And then little Johnny kind of interrupts everybody, saying like, look, I drew this picture of you, Grandma. And Ronnie looks at the picture, and she's like, oh, it's so lifelike.
Yes. For Picasso, maybe.
Here, Grandma, I drew one of Grandpa, too. And then little Johnny holds up a picture showing Martin, and the whole tone kind of shifts, and everybody kind of silently has their moment where they're thinking about Marty and how he just recently passed. And that moment is interrupted right when Steven approaches again. And then Niles and Frasier kind of have this moment where they start reminiscing. They start talking about how things have changed. And they mention that the restaurant they're in was actually the same restaurant that they were in the show. So it's revealed that the restaurant they're eating in now was once the restaurant that the two brothers owned together. So we thought this would be a really great nod to one of my personal favorite episodes of Frasier, which they ran the Happy Brothers restaurant. So we thought that since, Frasier was still in Seattle, this could kind of lightly touch upon gentrification and how things kind of remain the same but are constantly different. So, anyone who has lived somewhere for a long time, especially like in a major city, and, they've either lived there a long time or they've left and come back, like they know that feeling of everything is the same but everything's different, right? Because things are constantly changing, buildings are constantly renovating. So, we thought that this would be just kind of like a social commentary, like, wow, I have been here before, but I forgot I've been here before because so much has changed. So, so I thought this would not only be like a nice little funny quip for the fans who remembered the episode, but I also thought that being in the restaurant would kind of give Frasier a sense of familiarity when he's returning to his hometown after being away for so long. So Niles, fondly recalls, how he and Frasier had so many adventures in the past, and they're, just talking about like, wow, it's been so long since we've been together like this. We used to hang out like this all the time, and now we don't. And that's when Steven kind of slides in again and drops the check. And we thought that this would be a funny experience because Frasier kind of loses it on Steven at that point. And anybody who knows Frasier, they know that he's like famous for his hissy fits, and he is definitely the epitome of a Karen. So we thought it was funny to give Frasier like his Karen moment in the restaurant when he's experiencing like modern service. So Frasier goes on like a little tangent here, and he kind of like unloads on poor Steven, kind of embarrassing his family. And we just thought this would be a funny experience, not only for Frasier, but also just a nod about how terrible it is working in the customer service industry. And just, a nod to just how terrible customer service has been, how it's just kind of gone downhill in a lot of places. And it's more about getting you in and getting you out than
quantity over quality.
Exactly.
Right, because of the supply and demand.
Right. So we just thought this was like a funny moment that a lot of people could relate to. And
you should be able to relate to this in some way or another as anyone who has ever worked or ever been served before or ever had a dining experience or has ever seen someone has this experience before.
Exactly. Like, I think that this moment could be appreciated for several different reasons, right? So then that moment is then just kind of nicely wrapped up by Frasier's comical line.
I think we'll see that dessert menu now.
All right, so now Frasier is alone at Ronnie and Martin's empty apartment, and it's just him and Eddie. And there's a lot of stuff and a lot of boxes everywhere. So he's trying to write the eulogy for Martin's funeral, and he starts getting distracted by Eddie, who's nosing around the closet and he's making a lot of noise. Eddie pulls out Martin's old walking cane. He starts banging it on the ground, making a lot of noise. When Frasier walks over, he takes the cane from Eddie, and then he kind of has a moment where he's just looking at it, like sadly, reminiscing about his dad. When suddenly the doorbell rings, and it's Niles. Comes in. Frasier thanks him for stopping by and helping him out, clearing up Martin's old stuff. Niles, mentions how he is like, yeah, no worries. I actually welcome, taking a break from my family. So no problem at all. Frasier is kind of stunned by Niles' remark. And then he checks in on him and he's like, hey, is everything okay at home? Niles, apathetically responds like, no, it's fine. Just deflects the situation. And then he comically starts having the eye twitch again. Frasier's like, are you sure? He's like, yeah, I'm totally fine. So what are we doing here? Then Frasier goes on to explain how he promised Ronnie how he would help box everything up and, get everything ready for her. Niles makes a joke like, hey, you could have paid someone to do this for you. And Frasier then explains that, hey, I've been having a hard time writing Dad's eulogy. Maybe going through some of his old stuff might help me. Ah, yes, evoking reflective nostalgia as an attempt to elucidate the prototypical nature of your relationship with Dad. So Eddie starts acting out, and Niles is like, what's going on with the dog? Frasier says he doesn't know that Ronnie's been complaining about his behavior, and then he kind of shoos Eddie out of the room. While Frasier's gone, Niles discovers the Cordoba.
Oh my God. It's the Cordoba.
We thought this would be a good little Easter egg for people who are fans of the original Frasier show. This was also a really good moment in the show that we thought would be kind of nice to sprinkle into this moment, especially considering the meaning of the situation. So we did. Because for anyone who watched the original show, Martin gave this painting to Frasier as like a bonding moment. And when he gave the painting to Frasier, he said, I'm actually really happy to give this to you because I know that when I am going to be gone, that this painting will still be here for you to, kind of like remember me by. Right? And now here we are. Martin is gone. They're going through all the stuff, and then they find the painting. So we just thought it was a nice way to kind of circle back to that moment and, just bring a lot of meaning into, what they're doing.
Exactly. It was a nice cyclical nod to John Mahoney's presence in their lives with this absolutely hilarious but again meaningful work of art that he thought was an attempt to class himself up and be just like Frasier and Niles, because they would always talk about how they were out collecting art, or they were always talking about very avant-garde names and things and places, and that was his way of, again, like you said, attempting to make a bond with his sons.
Right. And now his sons are kind of bonding again through discovering this painting after their father died. So we just thought this was, again, just like a nice, sweet moment, and it just a good little nod to the original show and a good Easter egg for anyone who actually did remember this moment. So
exactly.
Yeah. So so they're looking at the painting, and then Niles is like, wow, like I remember when Dad got this for you. And Frasier's like, yeah, I can't believe he actually thought I would like something like that. So they continue kind of rummaging through the boxes, and that's when Frasier notices that all the items that Martin has saved seems to be from Niles' side of the family. Niles kind of, dismisses the remark. Frasier keeps digging through the boxes, and he's getting more and more worked up as, he's realizing that the only keepsakes that Martin has kept are, in fact, from Niles' side of the family. So then Frasier starts questioning, like, well, what has Dad kept to remember me, right? And then this is where Frasier kind of goes into Karen mode again. And then he starts complaining and, yelling at Niles.
Really? Well, that's not what I see. All I can see are photos of Niles and Daphne's anniversary, little Jodie's first dance recital as the Sugar Plum Fairy, David's macaroni motherboard. Oh, look, Eddie's first caller. What is here to encapsulate my memories with Dad? A few books? Some newspaper clippings? Here, a single picture of Frederick. That's it.
So Niles tries to remind Frasier that material items don't represent Martin's actual feelings towards him, and tries to explain, there's more stuff from Niles' side of the family because they're the ones that were with him in his later years.
I was with him for 11 years. The man didn't even bother to hang up my picture, and he practically makes a shrine of you and your family.
Niles steps in to remind Frasier to be fair and that Martin loved them both equally. Frasier accuses Niles of not understanding his position because Niles is obviously Martin's favorite child. Niles kind of questions him, like, what's that supposed to mean? Frasier goes on to say, after everything, out of all of our rivalries, out of everything, that Dad has clearly favored you over me. Niles is very calm, he's very serious, and he just kind of steps in and says, Frasier, like, what's going on? What is this really about? Niles reminds him that Frasier was the one who made the choice to leave. He basically checks him and reminds him that no one stopped him from leaving, no one stopped him from coming back, and he reminds him, like, hey, we're your family. We have always been here. We're always going to be here for you. So what are you angry about? He reminds him that, it was Frasier's choice to follow his career. Niles made the choice to raise a family, and that's nothing to be upset over. These are choices that people make, and we need to stand by our choices.
I'm not sure why I'm so upset over the lack of family photos in these boxes. Perhaps the real reason is because now, for the first time in my life, I'm realizing that I don't have a family to take photos with.
All right, grab your tissues, because things are about to get sad. All right, so we are now at Martin's funeral. The service has yet to begin, and everybody is kind of waiting in the lobby to be seated. So here we see Roz. She is looking amazing, and her and Frasier, have this nice moment because they haven't seen each other in a really long time. So she gives her condolences to Marty and basically gives Frasier the rundown of who she is now. So Roz is now like an executive. She is in a super powerful position. She runs a really famous local talk show in Seattle called Good Morning Seattle. And she, mentions how she actually saw Frasier's book on the bestsellers list and congratulates him.
Oh, well, I've just been so busy these past years with my life in San Francisco. My private practice has been absolutely booming. Between that, writing 5 books in 3 years, I barely had time for anything else.
Roz is like, oh my gosh, I should totally have you on the show. Frasier's like, I couldn't. I've been off the air in so long. I I wouldn't even know what to do. She's like, whatever, I could make you famous like that. Think about it. This is definitely something that I could make happen. So let me know, right? The priest announces that the service starts. We named the priest Father Mahoney. We thought that would be just like a nice honorable mention, again, to John Mahoney, because we really did want to just pay respect to that actor. So everyone now enters this service. Frasier kind of nervously pulls Niles aside. He explains that he's really anxious and that he's overwhelmed because he still hasn't prepared like a proper speech for Martin's eulogy. Niles then kind of reassures him with this funny line. Frasier, what do you think Dad would say to you right now? He'd say, keep it clean and speak from the heart. So Frasier feels better and then walks into the service. There is a very somber scene as everyone takes their seats. We really wanted this to be a very serious moment. So Father Mahoney introduces Frasier. Frasier takes the podium and delivers the eulogy. Again, we really wanted to pay tribute to John Mahoney and his legacy and everything that he has provided for us as fans. So since Adam is a huge fan of this man and his work, I'm going to let Adam take the wheel on this and explain, why he made the choices that he made in writing the eulogy, because this really was Adam's creation. I had little to no input whatsoever on this. So here you go, Adam.
Why, thank you, Kim. That was very, very nice of you to say. Well, So I wrote a eulogy. Part of it was for John Mahoney. Frasier paying respects to Marty, his father, or Martin Crane, as he's known. So when I wrote the eulogy, it was from the perspective of Frasier honoring his father, Martin. He was honoring Marty, and it was after time had passed in his life that he hadn't even seen Marty basically since the last episode of Frasier, which was a very heartfelt and meaningful farewell for anyone who recalls the show. The other part of the eulogy was actually my way of having a eulogy for my own father if we had a functional relationship. For no one really knows my personal life, and I typically like to keep it that way. When it comes to this eulogy, though, I believe that it was important for me to speak from my own heart, because of Frasier speaking from his heart about his father, portrayed by John Mahoney, who I believe played Marty perfectly. And for me, looking up at John Mahoney's performance as a positive male role model for me to follow as a grown man who has been alive for many years, it's rare to find individuals, whether it be through art or real life, that you do find that influence from, a genuine, sincere influence from. And John Mahoney's performance as Martin Crane in Frasier had provided a sincere influence for me in a positive light, not only to relate to this character and John Mahoney's portrayal of the character in many regards, but to actually be touched by this not only performance but this character's existence. It's a very complex thing to think about, the balance between personal and professional work in in what you write. But I felt it was, or I believe it is important to put a part of your personal life into what you write. With that being said, I did write a eulogy in honor of Martin Crane from the perspective of Frasier, and I will read that eulogy to you now. This was a very difficult. This was my first script I've ever written. I'd like that to be known, and this was a very difficult part of the script for me to write. However, I believe that it was my responsibility to write this eulogy for not only John Mahoney and Martin Crane, but also, again, if I had a healthier relationship with my own father, this would be a part of that too. So, in in Frasier's words, my father was a great man, and although he rarely ever said it and had his own special way of showing it, I know that my father loved me. He loved us. All of us. Each and every one of us here, right now, in this very moment, honoring this great man's life. As a young man, my father enlisted in the United States Army and was proud to serve his country. He then became an honored police officer and detective for the Seattle Police Department for 30 years. As we got older, Dad told us that he joined the service for the same reason he became a police officer, because he always thought about the safety and well-being of others. Dad wanted us to have a bright future, full of possibilities and happiness. This is the reason why he sacrificed so many of his dreams so that my brother Niles and I could follow ours. Dad knew what was truly important in life. He would sing and write songs, and he loved to dance. Of course, he would never let anyone know that about him. He wouldn't want to bring that type of attention to himself. I always knew, though. That was the blessing of being his son. Being able to share those special moments that made his life so meaningful as it did mine. I will always remember his voice, his wisdom, his laughter, his warmth, and his smile. My father was an incredible human being. He was not a perfect person, but he was a perfect father, for me anyway. I will admit, at one point, times were tough for me and Dad, and it didn't get any easier when we started living together. I'm sure you've heard the stories. Looking back, I realized that those 11 years with Dad were the most cherished memories of my entire life. I did not know it then, but I finally understand it now, and for that I am eternally grateful. For what it's worth, my father wouldn't have wanted us to mourn his loss. He would have laughed it off and changed the subject because he always believed that life is worth enjoying, not crying over. And you know what? He was right. Now I leave you with these words from the poet Mary Elizabeth Fry. Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am the thousand winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you waken in the morning's hush, I am the swift, uplifting rush of gentle birds in circling flight. I am the soft star that shines at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there. I did not die. I love you, Dad.
All right, so now we find ourselves after the funeral. Everyone is gathered at McGinty's, which was Martin's favorite bar and was often featured in the original Frasier. So we thought that would be a nice tie back. So everyone's at McGinty's. Ronnie is at the piano and she's with all of Martin's friends. Everyone's just kind of singing and swinging beers, and they're singing loudly and cheering. They're singing the really famous song "Hail Hail, the Gang's All Here," which you can hear playing in the background, and everyone just is like, "To Marty!" and everyone takes a cheers and just toasts his memory. Then cuts to Frasier, Niles, Daphne, and Roz. And they are all sitting at a table together. They're drinking. They just got done toasting. They're all sitting at the table and they're just, reminiscing about Marty, talking about how much he loved that bar and how he spent a lot of time there. And they then go on kind of talking again about how things have changed and how it's been so long since they've all sat around a table together. They talk about how their favorite places have changed, which is kind of like another nod to gentrification and how things are constantly changing, especially in fast-paced environments in major cities like Seattle. Nothing stays the same, but it all stays the same, right?
Exactly.
So Daphne is like, okay, she calls it a night. She grabs the kids. Everybody says goodbye to one another. And now it's just Roz and Frasier. And they're sitting at the table together. Roz kind of goes off again, like, hey, wouldn't it be so awesome if we worked together? Like, just, wow, what a great idea. Frasier is very hesitant to the thought. He is feeling kind of self-conscious about returning to the air, and Roz is, just being a typical pushy executive. She's like, hey, I got a time slot to fill. We got to get this thing going, right? So she's like, wouldn't it be so great if we did this? It would be just like the olden days. And Frasier is hesitant. He says, I don't think I can just drop my life to come back up here to Seattle. To which, Roz kind of like, being snappy. She kind of, so which Roz, she kind of like, being snappy. She's like, really? Do you really have a life out there in San Francisco? Because from what I hear, it's just you writing books out there, So she kind of presses him on his quality of life and just really tries to push him to come back to Seattle. She basically explains to him, like, as a friend, like, hey, I'm offering you a chance to have a rich life here. This is where you're from. This is your hometown. This is where your family and your friends are. Let's face it, we're not spring chickens anymore. What do you really have to look forward to in your life, right? So this is where Frasier kind of really questions himself and what he has to offer. He basically goes on to explain to Roz, like, look, I can't just come back. I've been out of the spotlight for so long. How do I connect to an audience? How am I relevant? Who's going to listen to me or care about what I have to say? And we thought that this was actually a really deeper meaning for Frasier in general. This is not just Frasier the character returning back to his former life. This is Frasier the show returning back to the air. And I think it was kind of like a double layered meaning. Like, not only is Frasier questioning where he as a character fits into society, but it's us kind of commentating, like, where does Frasier, or us, excuse me, it's us questioning where does Frasier fit into this modern society, right? Like,
Right.
this was kind of like our little message within a message about Frasier the show just returning and being rebooted, like, in general, because I mean, let's face it, the show has been off the air for a very long time. Our current state of entertainment and just our culture and our mediums of entertainment have completely changed since Frasier's time. So how does he relate to that? Frasier coming back, what does that look like? What does that message look like? Who's going to listen to that message, right? So we thought that this was a really powerful question to ask, not just as fans, but for Frasier himself. Like, where do I fit into this context? Right? So, you know, we did kind of butter up Kelsey Grammer a little bit here. I mean, because, I mean, hey, we were applying for a job at the end of the day, right?
Why not?
But, you know, regardless, I felt like, Roz's questioning and just like her overall message was a pretty powerful one because, she's asking Frasier, what do you want? Because we're getting older, we don't have a lot of time left. And now that you're kind of experiencing the death of your father, we're looking at our own mortality now. And we have to ask ourselves, what do we want? How are we going to get it? And how are we going to get this accomplished within this new culture and within this new medium that we've been thrusted into? Right? So, again, we really kind of thought through everything that we wrote, and we didn't really just want to write fluff. Like, we wanted to write something that had like significance and meaning behind it. So
Exactly.
So yeah, so here is where Roz, here's where we butter up Kelsey a little bit. This is where Roz just basically says it. She says a lot of people are going to listen to you, Frasier. She's like, I know that you can't see it, but I can. I know you've been out of the game for a long time, but I know you, and I know what you're capable of. You're handsome, you're sophisticated, you're a prominent psychiatrist, you have decades of experience and insight, and that's a lot to offer people. Things are moving really fast. Life can change direction so quickly. So you got to know what you want and you got to grab it. So again, I'm going to ask you seriously, as your friends, what do you want? Right? So Frasier is now alone and he's sitting at the table kind of, letting her question and her message kind of soak in and, take effect. And then we have this really like sweet transition where there's like a close-up of Frasier sitting at the bar table alone. And now it's, you pan out a little bit and now he's sitting at the table in Ronnie's apartment. And he's holding Roz's card and he's still just really thinking about the message and about what she asked him. And then Eddie interrupts his train of thought and he starts acting out. So Frasier is just like, okay, dog, I am done. You need to calm down. Let me get you some food. As Frasier gets up to go get some dog food, he comes back and he sees that Eddie is in front of Martin's picture. And he's kind of scratching at the picture and he's whimpering. And then Frasier, just has this really sad face. Like, Frasier realizes why Eddie's upset, right? Suddenly clicks. And then we have this really, really beautiful, and we wanted it to be like a really tasteful transition where Frasier is like, okay, Eddie, come here, boy. And he grabs Eddie's leash and he puts it on. And once he takes Eddie's leash off, we are now in a really nice cemetery. And it's, just like a gloomy day in Seattle. It's, drizzly, it's gray, it's cold. And as soon as Frasier takes off the leash, Eddie just instinctively and very quickly runs over to Martin's grave. He just knew that that's where Marty was buried. And you see that Martin is buried next to Hester Crane, which is his wife. And then Eddie starts like whimpering and pawing at his headstone. Frasier's just kind of watching in the distance, getting misty-eyed and, feeling Eddie's pain. And this was going to be like a really sweet, tender, like somber moment where Eddie kind of like circles on the grass in front of Martin's grave, and then he kind of curls up and lays down, and then he goes to sleep. We are going to fade out, and we see Frasier now standing in front of his parents' grave. It's rainy, it's drizzly, but it's clearly a different day. And as Frasier kind of bends down to put the flowers on the grave, we pan out a little bit more and we see a third smaller grave that says Edward Crane. So we thought that would be just like a really sweet, tasteful moment. Like we, put Eddie to rest. Eddie and Martin are now resting together, and everybody has, Frasier especially, or Frasier has now paid his dues to his father and Eddie. So after Frasier pays his respects to his family, he takes his phone out of his pocket, he dials a number to make a call, and then he says,
"Yeah, hi, Roz. I was wondering if that offer is still available."
And then we fade out from there. In true Frasier fashion, we had to do the tossed salad and scrambled eggs. So here we have that. And the tossed salad and scrambled eggs was basically going to be a close-up of Marty's face in a photo frame. And as it kind of slowly pans out and expands the image, you see a photo of Eddie next to Martin. And then the shot continues to pan out, revealing Frasier is actually unpacking. He's in his new apartment. You don't really see Frasier. You just kind of see his hands and his body motion. But there's a nice big wall shelf or bookshelf there and boxes. And he's just kind of going through the boxes, and he puts Eddie's picture next to Marty's picture on the shelf, and that ends the episode officially. So that was it. Thank you guys so much for watching. We really, really, really want your feedback. So please, if you can take the time, drop a comment below or visit our blog or one of our social media sites and let us know, what did you think? Did we deserve to get ghosted? Should we have been hired? Were they totally wrong, or were they totally justified in ghosting us? Let us know. Thanks for watching.